everybody in the world.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you want to contribute and interact with the show directly while it is live, you can make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Leave a comment in my comment section. Click the $ if you do wish to donate, and I will be glad to read your comments aloud, read your own opinions aloud on my live show. They're a great way to interact with me, my fellow podcasters as well. Go check out what they're doing. They are great in their own right, but it just ultimately makes the show so much smoother, so much better, and I appreciate every single comment that you guys have talked about to date on this show. Without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of today, and let's talk about one of the better segments on the show. I always love saving this for the end of the week. The NFL and college football games that will have the hugest fantasy implications when we start off in the NFL. There are 3 games that caught my attention in week 6 of the NFL season that I feel project to have some big fantasy implications. Both or 2 of them are divisional games. So you can expect them to be very feisty. And one of them is just a good old-fashioned QB battle. And we talked about it briefly in the first segment, but overall, all 3 of these games, I feel like, have players that can be X factors in your fantasy teams this week. And hopefully this segment will also help you make those important fantasy decisions to help bolster your team. So without further ado, let's jump right into today's second segment. Starting off with the first game, we talked about this a little bit in our first segment and throughout the week as well, but it's perhaps the best fantasy game of the weekend. Commanders versus Ravens. It's a fantastically fascinating game in terms of fantasy implications because of the 2 quarterbacks and how they operate their offenses. On the Washington side of things, Jaden Daniels is in a system with Cliff Kingsbury that is not often seen in the NFL. It's a more college-style offense where he can make quick decisions based off what he sees in the defenses. And thus it takes a lot of pressure off himself, and thus he feels like he can generate more big plays, and he feels a lot more confident in this system with kind of free reign over what he can do. Kudos to Cliff Kingsbury for allowing this freedom in this offense, because it's very tough to do that with a rookie quarterback. But we're seeing Jaden Daniels handle this offense with poise, with competence, with confidence, and most importantly with ease. He's making it look easy to run this offense. And not for nothing, it is in many ways a simplified offense so that he doesn't necessarily have too much pressure on him. But the fact that he's making his own decisions, he's seeing things on the defensive side, I feel like he's for real this season. That being said, on the Ravens side of things, they're going to have to worry about slowing down Lamar and co. because this offense is just as good as what Washington brings to the table. You have Lamar now with Derrick Henry in the backfield, and this completely changes the dynamic of when Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins were still there. Because when Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins was still there, this team was just too concerned, much like what the Dolphins are seeing now with speed. When you have too much speed, chances are you don't necessarily know how to utilize it best. We saw it early in Lamar Jackson's career. We're now seeing it a little bit in Miami. But now that you have a guy in Derrick Henry who can do a little bit of both, kill you with speed and with physicality, it just makes the Ravens that much harder to defend. And the Commanders' defense, not for nothing, has felt like at times it's been improving, but it's still far from where it needs to be on the offensive level and to play a well-rounded game of football where both the offense and defense really complement each other. And it's definitely not going to happen against this Ravens team. In terms of fantasy implications, look for big games from Daniels and Lamar at the QB positions. That's a non-starter. Both of these guys feel like QB1 immediate starts for this week. In terms of their offenses, I feel like Terry McLaurin is someone to watch. He's going to have a tough matchup against Marlon Humphrey, but he's getting vertical, he's stretching the field, proving to be a pesky receiver for opposing defenses and corners to handle. On the Ravens side of things, I still like Isaiah Likely a lot as perhaps that number one, receiver in this whole offense, even though he's a tight end. Because I feel like Lamar is developing a rapport with him. Zay Flowers has had decent games here and there, but he's not had a breakout game just yet for this Ravens offense. So I just feel like Isaiah Likely is the way to go if you want a competent skill position player from this Ravens offense in your fantasy squad. But overall, it should be an exciting game. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to these two MVP caliber QBs duking it out. Let's transition to the next game. Another divisional game. Much like what we had last week when we had a lot of divisional games with huge fantasy implications. This one, maybe not as much as, now that we know about Derek Carr, but I still feel like there's value in the Saints team nonetheless. It's Bucs Saints I'm talking about here. Another NFC South battle. And the thing that I love about fantasy in the NFC South is that you can just get as weird and wacky as you want if you have a load of NFC South players in your fantasy squad. Because everyone is so balanced, the parity is crazy. And in terms of both of these teams, I kind of feel like you have a lot of high-end talent that you can trust for your fantasy squad. On the Bucs side of things, we already know. When Baker, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin are all clicking, this is a very hard offense to stop. I'm a little bit worried about the defensive side of things, but the offense is going to be humming and firing on all cylinders in this game. For the Saints, it gets a little bit weird now that Derek Carr is going to miss a couple of games, but I do like both of their backups. In the brief time we saw Jake Haener, he looked competent enough. He's not going to start, though. It's going to be Spencer Rattler, who was actually seen as a first-round talent, early in his college career. But as he had a lot of transfers throughout his college career, his stock kind of plummeted, and now he's backing up Derek Carr. But now is his opportunity, stepping onto the field against a divisional opponent to prove himself and prove that he can operate this offense at a high level. And perhaps, if Derek Carr's future is uncertain in New Orleans, could take over that number one QB role. And so, on that side of the football for the Saints, I'm not looking for a lot of explosiveness, so maybe Rashid Shaheed would be someone you should shy away from. But I still like Alvin Kamara a lot in this game. He's a security blanket for this young guy. And I still think that when all is said and done, Chris Olave, that last performance was not indicative of what he can really do, and he's going to have another good performance in this game. But overall, just acknowledging the fact that it's an NFC South game should let you know that there's going to be a lot of importance. As my man, Andre, is in the chat. Welcome to the show, my man. I feel like this Bucs Saints game is a game that ultimately is a no-brainer to a lot of fantasy players because you have two solid receivers on both sides of the ball on both teams, and you have offensive game plans that allow for these offenses to really let loose and play free-flowing football. And so I'm really excited about this game, even with Spencer Rattler now in it. As Andre said, bro, I had a trade in the works for Breece Hall, giving Mason and Downs. The injury happens. Yeah, I feel like Mason's stock was going to plummet at some point. And then, of course, with all the injuries, especially for the 49ers going down like that, it's kind of weird to watch because he had a little bit of a short leash because of the fact that it sounds like McCaffrey's coming back maybe next week, maybe 2 weeks from now, but we'll see. So I feel like, if you just put him on the waiver wire, it will be okay. It's no big sweat, but, it is kind of weird to see how Jordan Mason could have been a very valuable trade asset. And as he also says, I'm even willing to take a chance on ETN giving Mason. And he does think CMC is coming back, much like myself. But, yeah, if you can find a different trade package, I feel like it could work out for you in the end. But I feel like Mason at this point is just a waiver wire kind of player right now. I don't see any universe where he can be traded because his touches are going to plummet soon. And so he's just going to be someone who's going to lose value by the second. So I wouldn't worry about trading him. But you do want to supplement your running back room, I understand that. So maybe finding a different trade package. As he does say, should I trade Garrett Wilson, I believe, and Jordan Mason for Justin Jefferson? That's a huge swing for the fences, but I like it. I really like 2-for-1 deals where you're trading away multiple players and just receiving one, but you got to do it for a guy like Jefferson. I know it's a big risk, as he says, giving up a first-round player and Jordan Mason for Justin Jefferson, but I feel like at this point of the season, we now know who both Wilson and Mason are at this point. Wilson might not get going again in that Jets offense, and Mason now injured, not going to come back and get many touches once he comes back. So you gotta make this trade because, yes, it's tough to give up a first-round player, but you gotta do it for Justin Jefferson, who's going to be a game changer in the immediate future, rather than someone who struggled to start the year and a now injured player. So I would definitely go through with this trade. But the last game I want to talk about here before we go take a quick break is the Lions-Cowboys, as he says. I'll then have Jefferson and Chase. Well, it works out perfectly then in the end. Good luck if that trade goes through for you because your team will be looking pretty stacked going forward. But the Lions and Cowboys is an interesting game here to conclude this segment because I feel like both of these teams are spiraling in different directions, but I still feel like there's a little bit of value to be had with the Cowboys in terms of fantasy because you still got to consider the fact that, yes, Dak and CD have a good connection. And occasionally, guys like Dowdle, guys like Ferguson, even a guy like Jalen Tolbert is projecting to have a breakout season. As Andre also says, do you think it'll get vetoed? I don't think so. I mean, it's kind of a weird trade, but at this point, you got to at least test the waters because just to be safe, I'm going to send Mason, Wilson, and Downs. I feel like no matter who you send, I feel like at least the person who you're trading with will consider it because it's silly not to. But I still feel like to kind of make it safe, maybe throwing Downs, but I still think it would go through if it's just Mason and Wilson. But we do want to talk a little bit more about Lions-Cowboys. I think that Jared Goff and Amon-Ra are perhaps the two biggest fantasy threats in this game, but I also really love Laporta and actually the Lions' defense in this game. I feel like they're well equipped to handle what Dak and CD can do, and if you just make them a one-trick pony, they have a lot of value. On the Cowboys side of things, Jalen Tolbert is a deep sleeper for this game and for your fantasy league in general. And I actually really like the upside of what Jake Ferguson can bring to the table. I've been hoping that he's been going to get going for many weeks now, but I still feel like now is the time for him to truly be the breakout star we thought he could be. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this second segment. Let me know what you think in the comments about it. Coming up next, we transition a little bit from NFL to college football, very briefly talking about the same topic, big games with big fantasy implications. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of